LinkedIn presents.
Good morning, I'm Michael Kovnat, and this is the Next Big Idea Daily. So we're living in some interesting times, aren't we? Markets are volatile, AI is rewriting the rules of business, and the news cycle is a constant swirl of predictions and panic. In a world this uncertain, how do we make smart decisions? How do we separate real risk from hype, signal from noise, or coincidence from pattern? And how do we keep a clear head when so much feels out of our control? Well, today we're going to bring you some guidance on how to navigate uncertainty from Cambridge statistician David Spiegelhalter, a man who's been called the greatest living statistical communicator. In his new book, The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk, and Luck, David offers a calm, clear-eyed guide to making sense of the unknown. He reveals how understanding probability, not just relying on gut instinct, can help us think more clearly, communicate more honestly, and make better choices even when the future feels up for grabs. David joins us to share his big ideas right after this quick break.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Sir David Spiegelhalter, Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. I've extracted 5 key insights from my new book, The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk, and Luck. Insight number 1. Uncertainty is a relationship. We all have to live with uncertainty. We may not know what's going on at the moment. We may not know what's going to happen in the future, what's happened in the past, or why it happened. Uncertainty has been called the conscious awareness of ignorance, which emphasizes that uncertainty is a relationship between ourselves and the outside world. It has a subject, an individual or maybe a group of people, and an object, something we're uncertain about. Suppose I take a coin out of my pocket and ask you, if I flip this coin, what's the probability it will come up heads? You will probably say 50%. Then I flip it, cover it up, but then look at it without showing you and ask you, what's your probability that this is heads? At this point, people often become quite grudging about giving an opinion, but eventually they might reluctantly say 50-50. I've done something quite major here. Before I flip the coin, we have aleatory uncertainty, dependent on chance, what you can't know. But after I flip the coin and covered it up, you have epistemic uncertainty, what you don't know. In each case, our uncertainty is specific to us. I know how the coin turned up, but you don't. When I do this in front of audiences, I often use a 2-headed coin, so that even before I flipped it, I knew what the answer was going to be. So this simple demonstration shows that any assessment of uncertainty, in particular any use of probability, depends on our knowledge, our personal judgments, and our assumptions, and of course our trust. We should try and put our uncertainty into, maybe rough, numbers. We often use words like perhaps, maybe, likely in our general conversation, but it can be very dangerous to use such vague verbiage when making important decisions. Back in 1961, after President Kennedy's inauguration, he found out about the CIA plot to invade Castro's Cuba at the Bay of Pigs with 1,500 Cuban exiles. Kennedy commissioned an intelligence report by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to evaluate the plan, and they thought that the chances of success were only 30-70. That's a 70% chance of failure. But in the final report that went to Kennedy, these numbers were replaced by the phrase, a fair chance of success, by which they meant not very good. Kennedy approved the raid, and it was a complete fiasco. Of course, the report was not the only reason for approval, but the military later regretted they had not been clearer about their doubts. Modern intelligence services have learnt their lessons. In the UK, there's a fixed scale by which words are translated to probability ranges. If the term likely is used in an intelligence report, then this must mean between 55% and 75% probability. And a 30% probability of success, as in the Bay of Pigs, would be termed unlikely. Similar scales are used in climate change to translate between words and numbers. Of course, not everyone will agree about the chances. In 2011, President Obama had multiple teams assess probabilities for whether Osama bin Laden was in the compound in Abbottabad, and these ranged from 30 to 40% to 80 to 90%. After a long discussion, Obama concluded it was basically 50-50, and he approved the raid. But I feel it was useful for him to hear the large variation in opinion among his expert advisors. We should acknowledge the role of luck in our lives. Luck has been called the operation of chance taken personally. I don't believe it's an external force in our lives, but it's a useful way of describing events that were unpredictable, not in our control, and yet have had an impact. Philosophers have identified three main types of luck. The first, which I consider most important, is constitutive luck. Who you are born as, when in history, your genes, your early environment, and so on, over which you had no control, and yet has a huge influence on the rest of your life. Then there's circumstantial luck, being at the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. Finally, there's outcome luck, just how it happened to work out at a particular instant. I use my grandfather as an example. He had the bad constitutive luck of being born at the right time to join the British Army in World War I. Then he had the terrible circumstantial luck of being appointed brigade gas officer in the Ypres salient in January 1918, just after the Battle of Passchendaele. This was a very dangerous job, and his diary records narrow escape, lucky to get through in time, and so on. He lasted 3 weeks in the job, which I think was pretty good going, and then on January the 29th, 1918, a shell exploded close to him, and he was, as he later said, blown up. But he had the extraordinarily good outcome luck of not being seriously injured and being taken out of the front lines for the rest of the war. His unit suffered terribly later in 1918, and as a second lieutenant he would have been first over the top in counterattacks, blowing his whistle and encouraging his men to follow him. And almost certainly I would not be here now. Have humility about statistical models. A lot of work in science or climate change or risk analysis or gambling and so on is based to some extent on mathematical and statistical models. These are intended to represent the important parts of reality, but it's vital to remember that they are the map, not the territory. They're always inaccurate. As statistician George Box famously said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. It's important to remember this when we're doing statistical analysis, where the output from statistical packages gives us estimates, confidence intervals, p-values, and so on. But these are all, to some extent, wrong, because they are based on statistical models which make assumptions which are never precisely correct. Of course, many of the analyses are still useful. In the pandemic, the UK had 8 statistical teams trying to estimate the current average value of R, the number of people on average infected by someone with COVID-19. They used 12 different models, which gave somewhat different answers. Many of their uncertainty intervals did not even overlap, which meant they could not all be right. These intervals were just too narrow because they assumed the correctness of each model. Fortunately, all the teams got together each week and combined their results to come up with a composite answer with considerable uncertainty, which took into account the differences between the models. And this was published along with the 12 individual estimates. I think this was an admirable demonstration of transparency in science. and also showed the value of having multiple independent teams tackling the same problem, just as Obama did when judging whether bin Laden was in the compound. We therefore need humility about statistical models. Acknowledging uncertainty is part of being trustworthy. Experts want to be trusted, but philosopher Honora O'Neill says this is the wrong aim. Instead, they should be trying to demonstrate trustworthiness. This is a duty in itself, and may, of course, end up increasing trust. But how do we demonstrate trustworthiness? We, of course, need to be honest, but also to be balanced, describing the positives and negatives of any decision or the potential benefits and harms of any healthcare intervention. Crucially, we need to look inside ourselves and decide whether we're trying to persuade someone, to manipulate them into thinking or doing something, or genuinely trying to inform them and so empowering them to make better decisions. Another aspect of being trustworthy is to be open about your uncertainty, and also whether the evidence is of low, medium, or high quality. Finally, we should try to preempt misunderstandings, to say what the evidence does mean, but also what it doesn't mean, with the aim of trying to head off misinformation. So, for example, I believe we should not say vaccines are safe and effective, but that they are safe enough and effective enough to give to some people in some circumstances. We put this into practice when advising the UK government on their communication about the side effects of the AstraZeneca vaccine during the COVID pandemic. Randomized trials of different modes of communication have shown that if we do use a balanced format, trying to inform rather than persuade, it increases the trust in those who are skeptical, say, of vaccines. Another way of looking at this is that by giving a one-sided persuasive message, authorities are actively decreasing trust in the very group they might want to be reaching.
Thank you, David. Okay, listeners, you can get yourself a copy of The Art of Uncertainty at your favorite bookstore. And if you got something out of today's show, please leave us a rating or review to help others find it. That does it for us this week. These episodes were written by me, Michael Kovnat, and edited by Caleb Bissinger. The Next Big Idea Daily is proud to be part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. We'll see you Monday.